Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. We are under a week out from the Border Gavaskar Test Series beginning. Of course, I'm Menners, and joining me for the first of probably a couple of previews leading into this series, I'm joined by Gav Joshi, author of the Miracle Makers book, which was written with Barrett Sundaresan about the last time India toured Australia, and of course won famously at the Gabba. Gav, how are you?
I'm good. Looking forward to the series. A little bit different, last time we did on the shores, it was only me and Bharat who sort of covered the Indian angle. And now I think it's going to be about probably 20, maybe 30, maybe if India go well, 50 journalists here. So it's going to be unique. We're not going to be as unique.
Yeah, and it'll be a bit easier to get around the country than during COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, although at the WACA, we watched the training sessions from a tree in Blacktown because of COVID protocols, but looks like the same things happen at the WACA anyway. So not much has changed that way.
Good. All right, well, let's get straight into it. First thing, India just got absolutely hammered at home by New Zealand, 3-0. So I guess for you, does that change the way you're looking at this series now?
Not really. From what I've heard from India, they produced a couple of sort of tricky wickets. When I say tricky wickets, they wanted a quick finish. There's an agenda behind that as well. They reduced the workload of the bowlers was one. Someone like an Ashwin, they didn't want Ashwin Jadeja to bowl too much. It sounds very cynical in a way as well, but that's the reality of it. And plus the WTC, which means India had to get a win. So they took that sort of a risky approach. And a lot of people say, yes, the Indian wickets, but you just have to go back sort of, maybe about this time last year when England were there, and they actually got 5 great test wickets in India. So there's a clear sort of directive behind it. And from what I'm hearing, that was one of the reasons as well. So I don't think it concerns me, to be honest. I think sort of India have always had this, the Border Gavaskar trophy sort of in the background. That's what they'll be aiming for. A little bit about like the ODI 1D series, the captains are out to go to Coldplay. So while probably India's happy to lose 3-0, as long as they produce a result in the Border Gavaskar trophy. So no, it doesn't concern me that much what has happened. Pitches are different. And it's a totally different setting.
It sounds to me that sounds like they underestimated New Zealand. That they thought, let's pull out these ragging turners, get this test series over and done with. But it certainly backfired because, they lost their first series in 12 years. They got humiliated. No one could have predicted 3-0. And also their World Test Championship hopes are now in tatters. So it was an absolute disaster. So, they must come here under some pressure. Gambia's under some pressure. Some of the senior players are under some pressure. I think it changes the sort of the pressure on them. They still might do better in these conditions, but...
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I was going to ask you the same question, that in a way, who's under more pressure? Is it Australia? Because Australia's been defeated in the past 2 Border Gavaskar trophies at home, or is it India, who, like you mentioned, ever since the World T20, they were crowned World T20 champions, Gambia's taken over. They lost a one-day series in Sri Lanka after a long time. They defeated 3-0 as well at home as well. So, this is the big test for Gambia. What's he going to do? And not just that, and you look towards the future of Indian cricket, and Australia's sort of in that as well. India's at least started the transition process. There's no Pujara, there's no Rahane, who have been 2 important people in their victories in the last 2 sort of times that India's been here. But where does that put the 4 people who are in their sort of mid-30s, Ashwin, Jadeja, Kohli, Rohit, who I think all 4 will probably line up in Perth, but how long do they go for? This series could be, it could be about abrupt retirements. It could be if India don't go well. But Absolutely. I think there is a pressure, and I think there's expectation there as well now, Menace, given what happened in the last two series, especially the last one. So I think there's more pressure on India. Or do you think there's still pressure on Australia? Can Australia ill afford to lose the series again?
Yeah, I think there's more pressure on India because they're coming off a loss, as you say, high expectations, and just I think generally they play under more pressure. But it doesn't mean that Australia isn't under a lot of pressure. That their World Test Championship hopes are on the line. It's a home series. If Australia starts losing at home, it always turns ugly. So there's a lot of pressure on both teams, and I think it's interesting because I sort of think both teams are very good teams coming to the end of a cycle. As you say, India started the regeneration. Australia, there's got a few young players in there that'll be around for a while, but there's definitely a crop of players that are going to be out of the game soon. And I've said this before on the podcast. I think it's hard to know when players run out of gas, and it's going to be different for different players. So who knows if Kohli can reproduce what he's done here in the past? Do you think he can?
Look, I think Australia will come up with a very simple plan to Kohli. He's out of form. When you're out of form, generally you go searching for the ball. I think Australia, especially given where the first test match being at Perth, where the Knicks are going to carry, you're going to get a lot of dismissals behind the wicket. I think they'll just hang the ball outside the off stump, even a little bit wider than they bowl to Virat, and just test him outside that off stump. Let him play that boom cover drive. There was a practice session in lead up to this test match, and Indians in Perth, of course, practicing, and he nicked off a couple of times. So I think there's pressure. I think they're going to play on his ego. I think Australia's going to come very simple plan. Stay away from his stumps. Let him get it. If he can get 100 there. So I think this is a big test of Virat Kohli. Can he find a little bit of an alternative method, and which is patience, to grind 100 out, which is not traditionally his go. He wants to take on the bowling. He wants to pump his chest, but I think Australia can work towards that. So I think it's going to be challenging. I think the first couple of tests will dictate a lot if Kohli succeeds or fails.
But what I mean is that's where I think this series is interesting because, are we going to see a late renaissance from Kohli? Are we going to see a late renaissance from Smith, who's been, middling the last couple of years? Is he going to have a series where he scores 3 centuries again? And, I think those sort of things are going to be the difference in this series. So that's why I think it's interesting, because...
I don't think it's going to be a high-scoring series. If you look at traditionally, 2014-15, that was a high-scoring series. You look at even sort of the 2018-19 without Smith and Warner, it wasn't a particularly high-scoring series. I think, 300 was a good score. I think in Melbourne, on a very sort of Indian type of wicket, I think India got about 450. But apart from that, even the SCG test match sort of last time India were around, Australia got 370 odd batting first. So the quality in the bowling is quite good. I think, and because I think India don't have that third seamer, Mohammad Shami, we don't know. There's speculation he'll arrive after the first test match. And we haven't bowled, since the World Cup last year. So a bit of doubt over him. But in that's why I put Australia sort of ahead. If Mohammad Shami is fit, then I think we're going to get a closer series. So I don't think it's a high scoring series. With that Smith, Marnus, there's pressure on Marnus as well. You look at his last 7 innings. You can argue that pitches have been tricky, but he needs to score runs, and there's similar mode of dismissals to Marnus, as we've seen. Sort of, we cover a lot of Shield season, sort of international cricket. He hasn't scored. And in the one-day series, Pakistan have exposed him slightly as well. So a bit of pressure on him. But I think it's going to be one of those grinding batting series where I think if a team scores 300, I think they'll be in the box seat. I think I'm not going to say we're going to get flat pitches, but I think 300, 350 is going to be good. I don't My speculation is I don't think teams are going to score 400, 450, 500 consistently. That's what I'm predicting.
Yeah, what do you think of the attack behind Bumrah? So say Shami's not here. I mean, I think he's just returned to the Ranji Trophy, so we might see him sooner rather than later. But say he's not here for the first couple of tests. But he actually could be. So he could be here for the second test because there's a 10-day gap between the first and the second test. So that he actually could just miss the first test.
Yeah, I could just play that Prime Minister's game, the 2-day, which is day and night test match. But from what I've heard from the Indian camp, I think realistic is in December, which is 14th. I think when the Gabba test match is on, which is still 4 weeks away. So that gives him plenty of bowling under the legs. So that's probably what I'm thinking. Akashdeep's a good bowler. Don't underestimate him. Let's not forget 3 years ago, it was the Australian tour that created Mohammad Siraj. And now he's in he plays across all formats. Terrific bowler. And he's also matured late. Mohammad Siraj is 30 now. So when he came on the Australian tour, he was sort of 26, 27. Akashdeep is the same. He's not one of those raw quicks coming to Australia at the age of 20, 21. He's played a lot of first-class cricket. He's impressive. He bowls to fuller length. He's very good against left-handers. I think, a lot of people talking about the Usman Khawaja and Bumrah battle and Siraj battle, but, I think Akashdeep, when he bowls around the wicket, he's a tricky customer. So, but can he do it in Australia? He's never done it in Australia. But at the same time, Mohammad Siraj 3 years ago had never done it in Australia. So, I think so. I think big test. I think Akashdeep, they've got a raw pacer, Harshit Rana. I'm not quite sure about him. But then a lot depends. Pace is on one side, but man, as you know better than anyone, I guess, is that the three of Australian pace bowlers, the reason why they've been successful is because of Nathan Lyon. Ashwin was great last time they came out. He's 38. He's, I don't know where his body's at. To bowl in Australia, you need to use more body, whether he's fit enough to play all the matches or whatever tactic India go with. So I think the bowling is slightly weaker. But look, it's an intriguing battle. I still feel because Australia doesn't really have a batter in genuine form, like he's in rich vein and form. That's why I feel India, can compete, or it's going to be a close contest. But if a Smith or a Marnus or a Travis Head or anybody can have a really breakout summer with the bat, I think it could be a 4-1 or even getting to a 4-0 or something like that.
Interesting. I don't want to underestimate India because of what happened last time, because if you just and you wrote the book Miracle Makers, like if you just write down what happened, they had no right to win that series. There we go. There it is. I mean, it's a great book, but they had so many injuries. Kohli went home because of the birth of his child. They had no right to win that series, and yet they did. So I'm wary to not underestimate them this time. And I also think that they're going to have terrific support here. Like there's so many, Indian Australians now. There's going to be a lot of vocal support at all the grounds, but they're away from the pressure of being in India. So I actually think it could be a really close series. What do you think?
Yeah, look, I mean, I've got friends who can't even get a ticket to the opening day in Melbourne, so Boxing Day could be pretty much sold out. I think I think we're going to get crowds. If India play well, I think we could beat an Ashes summer record. I think it's going to be intriguing. One other aspect from last time India been successful is the coach Ravi Shastri. Like Ravi, he's got an Australian sort of personality. He's sort of take them on. He's carefree. He knows how to manipulate the media. Let's not forget it. Like us in media, we play an important role. We start a series. There's generally something written about the Indians or like they're whinging about something and the media puts pressure. Ravi was a master at that, and it's highlighted in the book. Menace, like that little game that he played, that after the SCG test, he said, we're not going to the Gabba. And I know it's written in the book from some Australian players were came back and saying, "What is the Gabba test happening or not? What's like?" It played in their mind. You know what I mean? They probably won't admit to it, but I've got sources that told me that from the Australian camp. So, and similarly, the important thing Ravi Shastri said when they came here, there was no Rohit Sharma. Virat was going to go home. Ishant Sharma, who's been in Australia for 4 tours, wasn't here. He basically said, "What's the pressure about us? I don't know. We won last time. We won a one-day series. We whitewashed a T20 series. Let's just go have fun." So he actually took that burden off the Indian players, and they sort of rose to that. At the same time, there were all these young players, the Siraj, the Shubman Gills, the Washington Sundar, and Australia didn't know much about him then, and sometimes that element of surprise can actually that bravado of young people, where if you fail, it's not a big deal. Gill can go away scoring 1 good innings out of 3, and people will remember that. But this time, the focus is on Gill. There's expectations to him to score 3 good innings. Can he perform? So I think India, like you said, is in a transition period, but there's enough experience there to ensure that the Indians genuinely believe. I don't know if people back home in India, I don't know many, even going by experts, if they genuinely believe that India can win the series, to be honest, this time. But I genuinely believe they feel there's a bit of concern that hope this team doesn't get walloped. So it's a big test. It's a big test for India. But don't forget, I think Ravi Shastri is very important. Gautam Gambhir is not that character. I think he's quiet. He's a decent manager, but he's that gritty, don't fight it out, whether that works or not, I'm not sure. I think you need to be a little bit different in Australia. You can't hide. You almost got to sort of take it all in. I'm not sure Gambia is that type of person. I think they're vastly different. And only time will tell if that really works or not.
Yeah, interesting. Well, we're seeing some, early sort of paranoia where they won't let anybody in to watch them train at the moment. And you speak about Shastri's strength. I think Gambia is not going to have those qualities. And my concern is they just showed against New Zealand they can go off the rails pretty quickly. So I think for India, they don't want to get completely trounced in the first couple of tests. Like they can't go 2-0 down in the series and expect to come back from there. They've got to be competing from, the first test.
Absolutely. And I'll ask you this question. Like, if you sat around the table with all the, the wise heads at CA, and you had Pat Cummins there and Andrew McDonald, and you wanted to conjure up the perfect schedule, you would say it's exactly what this summer's like. That is a perfect schedule, isn't it? Like, Australia,
Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane.
Brisbane, and the series could be over by Brisbane if Australia get it. Australia hasn't lost a day and night test match. Perth is, ideal. Gabba, yes, India won there first time in 31 years, but different time at the Gabba as well. It's going to be in December rather than late Jan, like 3 years ago. And fast bowlers who are fit. I mean, you got 3 fast bowlers who they've been able to monitor so well. I won't say cotton wool, but I think, from what I've heard from a couple of insiders in the camp, it's as good as, in conditioning wise, Stark, Cummins, and Hazelwood have been. They've been able to play. Which game do you want? Do you want match practice, play a one-dayer? Nathan Lyon, yes. Normally Nathan Lyon's played a lot of Shield games. He's only played 2, I think. So he's also, because they all, and you look at, it's funny because I was look at some numbers a minute. It's funny enough, in Perth, and that's where Nathan Lyon has actually done really well, because Indians generally, Nathan Lyon struggled against India in Australia as well, in Sydney and even types of Adelaide sometimes, and Melbourne when they got the slow pitches, when they go back and play comfortably. When the ball rushes on and speeds up and has bounce like it does at Brisbane and Perth, that's when Nathan Lyon's actually been very successful, and Nathan Lyon's outstanding record. So I think they're against the big, the grunt of that Australian attack in Perth. I think Perth's a big test for India.
I mean, I think this is a big series for this Australian side, really important for their legacy. They haven't beaten India since, 2014-15, haven't had the Border Gavaskar Trophy since 2017. So, this series is so important for Star Cummins, Hazelwood, Lyon, and the whole team after what happened last time where they got run over the top by India in that last series. So I think, it's so important about their legacy. What have you heard coming out of Perth at the moment, from people that are trying to, check out what's going on with the Indian team?
Look, for the first doubt is, as we record the podcast, that Rohit Sharma his wife has delivered a baby boy in the last sort of 12 odd hours. So there's speculation now, would he be here? The test match starts on Friday. Is he going to go? He has been training off the field. He has been training in Mumbai. So he's basically match fit. He's been training a lot, so he knows the Australian conditions. So he can, I think, basically land and play. So I don't think he'll play the first test. I think, given what I've heard from Perth, given how much input Jasprit Bumrah has been giving as well, I think Bumrah will captain that first game. I think they'll give Rohit that space. That's my understanding as of now. And so if that's the case, who's going to open the batting? Jaiswal is great. He's going to be, but some of them more challenged in the nets as well with a bit of the bounce. A lot of people nicking off, as I said, against the India A bowlers who we saw, the ones we were commentating on. So a big test for them. So that's the first one. Who's going to open? KL Rahul was hit on the elbow. I think he's going to be fine. Who did they pick? Sarfraz at 6. He's had a pretty good start. He averages 70 in first-class cricket. But big test, the way he plays square of the wicket in India. If he's playing that in India, then the ball's probably going behind, and that's where sometimes I think someone like Pat Cummins, they'll study. He's great assessor. He'll set the field. One thing Cummins you might get criticism from the outside, like having the deep point in from ball 1 as he did in the Ashes. So he won't be afraid that Sarfraz gets out there in the middle like 4 for 16. He'll have a fly slip in play. He won't be. Yeah. That's the good thing about it. So I think he's the big. Who did they bat at 6? We saw Dhruv Jurel. From the way they batted in the match scenarios yesterday, I think Dhruv Jurel looks at 6. I think Sarfraz was, they've given the bouncer treatment in the nets, and I'm not sure he's coming through in high colours at the moment. We've still got a bit of time for the test match, but I think he might be the guy who might force himself into that test side. Given what's happening up there, still a little bit of time, but I think India's got those two concerns, and the other one is, I guess, do they play Ashwin and Jadeja and back to 3 quicks?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Will they play both Ashwin and Jadeja?
But yeah, that's still there's still 6 days to go for the test match as we're recording this, so we could probably talk about that closer to the preview. What the pitch is like. I know it's very warm and hot in Perth, so I remember it was the last year that Pat Cummins, they sort of watered the pitch, and the Aussies thought, okay, great, it's been watered, it's got moisture, it's not going to crack. And then day 2, we saw cracks happening. So, look, it's going to be tricky. So let's wait for that, maybe build that up to the preview. But yeah, big expectation, I think, for India, just given what has happened. There's some youngsters who can really make a mark. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, I think India should consider playing Ashwin and Jadeja because I think they'll take wickets against our batting lineup. They've shown they're vulnerable to good spin bowling, and you don't get much better than those two. And if Lyon, I know they bowl differently to Lyon, but yeah, I'd be considering playing them if I was India. I've got a couple of questions for you. One thing, I'm a little concerned about Usman Khawaja. One, because we've just shown in the last 6 months to a year, he's showing signs of his age. I think he's almost 38 now. And 2, I think there's extra pressure on him because we can't expect too much from McSweeney. So we really need Khawaja to have a strong series. And I am a little concerned that maybe this could be his last series, and that spells trouble for Australia. What do you think? Yeah,
look, I mean, numbers are one thing, but I mean, I think he's better. Like, I think he was, he scored the most runs in the Ashes last year. I think last summer he was okay. He was okay in New Zealand as well. This grinding sort of Australian team setup, I think, suits Usman Khawaja. I think having McSweeney there, Marnus there. I think Australia's going to come out and feel that, hey, let's even be sort of 200 after 50 overs, or sorry, about after 60, 70 overs, and then Travis Head and Carey and Marsh to take the game away. And so that suits Usman Khawaja. You're right. Yes, I think India in generally have bowled pretty well to him. I think he's learned how to play Ashwin and Jadeja pretty well, as we saw when India was over there. So Australia was over in India 18 months ago. But yeah, there are concerns. And the other one, like you said, he's got a new opening batting partner, Nathan McSweeney. I was just doing some numbers minutes just before I came on. And, I think George Bailey said, well, when he's batted sort of early on for South Australia's numbers are decent. Now, you can judge. So I just sort of went back and said, ever since sort of 21, 22 season when he went to South Australia. So there's been on 22 instances in the Shield season when he's walked into bat before the 15th over. So facing the new ball, he's got 200s, 250s, and he's averaging about 34. So, there's 4 out of 22 innings he's gone ahead and made, more than 50 runs. But the other times, there's lots of 15s, 36, 25, sort of those kind of figures. And that again shows me that's Australia's tactic. If Nathan McSweeney gets 25 from 65 balls, I think Australia believe he's done his job. It's like an old school mentality. And if Khawaja does that, Marnus is not a counter-attacking batter. Steve Smith, let's see if India lock him up with that leg side field. That was planned, was conjured up in this book. Everything's in there. Ravi said, let's lock the leg side field for Marnus and Steve Smith. If they score 100 of 270 balls, I'm happy for that. And so Steve Smith's spoken about it. He's like, yeah, every time I've come to bat, one of the reasons why I wanted to open the batting is like every time I've come into bat, I can't score freely because they bowl stumps and lock me on the leg side. So if India do that again, a little bit harder to do in somewhere like Perth, and probably Adelaide maybe, with a bit of grass on the pitch, and of course Brisbane. Let's see what India's tactics are for that. So, but going back to that point, yes, I think Khawaja, I won't say he's under pressure. I think Marnus is probably more under pressure than him because he's still 30. Australia want good 3 or 4 years in Marnus before the next lot comes through. So, but I don't think so. I think there's enough good innings in Khawaja. If he bats, let's say 8 or 9 times, if Khawaja can score a couple of 80s, I think that's exactly what Australia's looking for. He doesn't have to have a big 140 and 180. I don't think that will happen either. But a couple of 80s is good enough for Aussie, I think, and it might be good enough for Australia.
Do you think Smith will have a good series?
Yeah, I think he'll have an okay series. I don't think we're going to see the Steve Smith from 14, 15. Let's not forget they were very flat pitches. I mean, Kohli got a lot of runs here. A lot of the Indian players, Rahane got a lot of runs. Pujara got a lot of runs. I think, coming back to the Indian squad, one concern I have with India is who's that grinder. Like, Pujara has worn Australia down in the last 2 series. He faced more balls than anybody. His strike rate might be 40, but he has worn the Australian bowling down. Who's there? I look at this Indian batting lineup. They're all stroke makers. I don't know who's got that game to score a 60 or 80 of maybe 140 balls that wears away Hazelwood and Stark and ensures that they don't play that 4th test, or Nathan Lyon needs to come back more. That's my bit of concern for India. I'm not sure who's capable of playing that role, but going back to Smith, I think so. I think he'll have a good series as well. I think, like I said, the pitches and the tactics that India succeeded with him 3 years ago probably what are not going to work for the first couple of games, just because first 2 or 3 test matches, because you look at the Gabba, you look at Perth traditionally, even Adelaide, with you want to nick them out again, rather than sort of bowl at the at the stumps. And I think the Indian bowlers, they bowl more tighter lines into the stumps rather than that little bit channel around 4th or 5th stump like a Hazelwood. And so I think that would suit Smith. I think he'll get into his innings more. I don't think he'll be choked down as much. But I think his battle with Ashwin in the middle order, I think that's going to dictate a lot as well. So it's going to be fascinating to watch.
All right, a couple more things and then we'll wrap this up. First thing is, I think there's a real element to this series where Australia might look at needing a real all-rounder for the back half of the series, depending on how much bowling Stark, Hazelwood and Cummins do in the first 3 tests. Then by the time we get to Sydney and Melbourne, if without Cameron Green, I think they might need a genuine all-rounder who could bowl substantial amount of overs. And I think there's a real question mark around Mitch Marsh. He hasn't done a lot of bowling recently, so no one knows how he'll go in this test series with his bowling, which I actually think puts more pressure on his batting. And so I think the first 3 tests are pretty big for Mitch Marsh as well, not just in the context of the series, because as you said, the way we're setting up the batting lineup, we're looking for his counter-attacking innings. But I also think he could find himself under pressure if he doesn't start this series well, that they need someone at 6, like a genuine all-rounder, an Aaron Hardy, a Bo Webster, who can back up the bowlers.
Look, I think it is a tight schedule, but I think, like sports scientists within sort of the Cricket Australia setup, it's if you're bowling sort of 3 days in a row, you want to take an 8-day rest. That's the general sort of rule of thumb. So if you look at if the 3 bowlers do bowl in Perth 3 days in a row, it could be day 2, day 3, day 4, whatever it is. You actually have 10 days to Adelaide, so they'll rest it up for Adelaide. Adelaide, cooler conditions. If that happens, then
pink ball,
you got 18. So the big gap is, I don't think even if all these bowlers overload in Perth, if I can use that term, it won't be an issue. I think going into Adelaide. If they overload in Adelaide, we could have an issue going into Brisbane. That's my gut feeling. That's when Mitch Marsh might be needed more. But that depends on the schedule. Yes.
Yeah, because I just think, obviously it depends how the series is going. If Australia are smashing India, they'll try and play the quicks the whole series. But I think they will be wary after last time, where it just looked by the final test of the series, the Australian bowlers were cooked. I don't think they'll want to head to, Sydney for the final test. They won't want to get to Melbourne and Sydney. So those two, they won't want to hit them if the series is tight and they're looking tired, or they don't bring an all-rounder in, they just switch in Scotty Boland for one of the quicks.
I think Brisbane and Sydney are the ones which will have a little bit of an asterisk on them. I said, it's the gaps between them. If they feel, because you look at Brisbane that finished on the 18th, Boxing Day 26th, done by that Cricket Australia bowl for 3 days, take an 8-day break, you still got 26. So and if anyone gets rested, I think in Melbourne, probably Starkey and Boland will come in, or Hazel will get missed out. Cummins probably plays all the matches, you'd think, as a skipper. I don't think Australia's that concerned, to be honest. I think, like you talk about the old days, and it's the rest and recovery, and there's been a lot of rest and recovery for the Australian quicks. That's what I mean. This schedule, if Cricket Australia sat down with Cummins, with McDonald, and said, give me a schedule. We only got 6 weeks. How do we fit 5 in? Where do you want to play? Australia's got the exact schedule they want. There will be no excuses. Last time, yes, 3 years ago, COVID, Brisbane Test match had to be in January. There was some issue with the Sydney square. The pitch didn't deteriorate, blah, 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 blah. I don't think there's any issues here. I think this is just ideally set up for Australia. Like, I'm not going to say pitch doctoring, but I'm going to say, like, this is just this perfect management. I mean, Australia just have everything at the moment going their way. Only thing stopping it is India playing so well out of their skin, or maybe an injury. I mean, and which is what I want to ask you before we sort of wrap up is which player in this Australian lineup is sort of almost irreplaceable, sort of going into the series? Who's like, what would be the most dramatic? So if day one or day two in Perth, who's one guy that Australia simply can't lose for the whole series?
Well, I think we saw it in the Ashes last year. I think it's Nathan Lyon. He's irreplaceable because obviously we know what role he plays in the team, supporting the bowlers, and he's just so good at that. And we saw what a hole it was when he came home for the Ashes. But I think that would be even more pronounced in this series because India are such good players of spin. So you'd have to look at a complete restructure of the team. You know, could you throw a Todd Murphy or a Corey Rockacholi? And so, yeah, for me, Nathan Lyon is our most vital player.
Yeah, couldn't agree. I think, yes, Smith is up there, but I know, important little tricky summer for Travis Head as well, because, you know, he did have the best summer last year. He did score 100 against Adelaide, against the Windies, but those counter-attacking innings, you know, if he nicks off early a couple of times, has a couple of failures, how does he bat? It might be a bit of a tricky situation, but given his role is to also accelerate the innings, and so is Mitch Marsh. I think one of the key members that nobody's talking about, and I think, you know, leading into Shield season, he's been in great form. Inglis is putting pressure on him. Watch out for Alex Carey. I think those couple of 40s lower down the order, maybe a good partnership with Cummins or a Stark. We've seen how important the lower order runs can be around world cricket, especially if it's 300, 320, and you know, teams we so find they're 7 for sort of 220 and they end up getting 320. So I think someone like him is going to be important. I think his glove work is great as well. So I just keep an eye out for Alex Carey. From an Indian side, I don't know, a lot of pressure on Jaiswal. No, I won't say pressure, but I think there's a lot of anticipation that this young man, 22 years of age, he's just born to be a cricketer. What can he do if he can score runs here, maybe get 100 and a couple of 50s even? Watch out for this kid. He's just going to be a batting phenomenon.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. All right, well, it seems like we're kind of in agreement about where we see the series. We both seem to have Australia slightly in front going into the series. But I think we're both conscious that this Indian team has the potential to rise, and if they get on a run, they could be very dangerous. So, anyway, well, let's catch. You go on.
It's more so what happened last time around, where nobody expected to rise. But like I said, I think circumstances different, better setup. You know, all these guys, the Rahanes, the Kohlis, Rohit Sharma came here, picked up a test, and all these guys were around 31, 32, more of their cricketing prime rather than 35, 36. So, look, you can be optimistic, but I mean, it'll be I think it could be. I mean, this book is called The Miracle Makers. I think it'll be more of a miracle if India win this series. I don't think they can do it this time around. I just can't. I think it's just so perfectly scripted for Australia.
Wow. Okay. Well, Gav, let's leave it there. Thanks everybody for listening to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. Check out Gav's book, Miracle Makers, the perfect little lead up to get you ready for the test series. Gav, let's catch up sort of early next week leading into the Perth test as we get a bit more news floating out of the teams. I was saying on the last episode, I've booked my tickets to the day-night test. So I'm going to be at 2 of the tests in person this series. So can't wait to get there. And listeners, thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, I might be there in Adelaide, so we might have to do this from the ground. So let's see.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. We'll be back soon. Bye.